A controversial UFO guru, under constant FBI surveillance, meets a disappointing end to his eccentric life after only 67 years as an Earthling. But it's especially disappointing for someone who claimed to hold the secret to immortality.
I was inside of a ship about 18 feet in diameter and roughly 10 feet high to the dome ceiling.
George Van Tassel's physical body may have shuffled off this mortal coil in 1978, but his legacy lives on as a pioneering figure in the atomic age UFO movement.
George Van Tassel is one of the classic 50s contactees.
There are many people who respect him, who believe that he did in fact have contact with benevolent space brothers.
And nowadays we have a discussion about whether these people are contactees, abductees, experiencers, but the bottom line is he encountered extraterrestrials.
Welcome to Landers, California. Landers, an apt name for a spot where benevolent space brothers from across the solar system could touch down and mingle. This was George Van Tassel's place.
So in 1954, in April, he had his first interplanetary spacecraft convention that brought out 2,500 people all together.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
A lot of people of that time. We have to realize the population was even much lower than it is today.
Futurists JJ and Desiree Hurtak are among the few people in the world who actually worked with Van Tassel and his organization.
And these people were just sitting around, they were talking, they were listening to people who had seen UFOs.
It was the start of a time period that was known as the contactee period. And George was known as the first space channeler. And he would speak to thousands of people out over here, and they would just cover this area.
These people in the 50s claimed to have more interactive, consensual encounters with aliens than the modern day abductees. But the guy has a colorful past, an amazing story, and he literally started an entire movement.
The 1950s were a period of time when there had been a flap in Washington, D.C. So many UFOs had been spotted there. And so it was in the public mind. And all of a sudden you had a flurry of people who were contactees claiming to be in touch with entities from Venus, even taking trips to and from.
People can't come from Venus. There is no life on Venus. But in 1954, we didn't know what the state of life on other worlds could or could not be. And this is actually a very long-standing Victorian idea of life on every planet, the plurality of worlds. So in his era, it's understandable that you might think there could be life on Venus.
What was it about George that drew people to him?
He was one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, with various aerospace companies that gave him credibility.
He was amazing. He worked for Douglas Aircraft, which is very famous at the time. This is during the war. And then he moved to Howard Hughes Corporation, and then he moved to Lockheed.
Then, in a bold move, he relocated his family to the middle of nowhere.
He just threw everything into a suitcase and relocated to the Mojave Desert. It was almost as if he was acting under some sort of compulsion.
So what was George Van Tassel thinking when he came out here? Why did he leave society in LA to come out here in the middle of the desert?
That is a complicated question because you have to talk about Frank Kreitzer before you get to Van Tassel with this.
Van Tassel met Frank Kritzer in the early 1930s and agreed to grubstake his mining efforts in the Mojave Desert. A few years later, Kritzer sent word to Van Tassel that he was onto something. So George followed the cryptic instructions and found Kritzer in a home he jackhammered out of a giant rock outside Landers.
This was bizarre, literally, rooms carved out under this place in the middle of the desert, and had his own airstrip.
It seemed like an ideal spot for the reclusive coot. But the operation aroused suspicion with local authorities.
Frank Kritzer was part of, you might say, a government was interested in what he was doing.
There were a lot of rumors about him. People thought literally he was a Nazi spy, and absolutely phenomenal story. He got into some sort of altercation with the local law enforcement people. There was a standoff.
The government had what is known as the old man's draft, and Frank happened to be 48 years old. And the story goes that there were 3 sheriffs from Riverside that came out here, and they wanted to escort Frank to Banning to help him register for this draft, and Frank refused to go.
Then he literally took dynamite, blew himself to pieces. That's how Van Tassel, who had fallen in with him, acquired the giant rock site.
A year later, he moved his whole family out here.
To do what?
Well,
For fun?
live.
Girls, don't go too far. Stay near camp.
People don't know that the desert gets really cold, so you have a family living out here. There's no electricity. It's a very difficult lifestyle that they were choosing.
I'm sorry, but if my friend blew himself up, I don't know if I would want to live in there. It's hard to say what motivated George to leave the big city for this new lifestyle at Giant Rock. But it's easy to pinpoint what sparked his dream to start a UFO empire here. It happened one night in August of 1953.
He was so excited about being able to live and manage Giant Rock Airport that they used to sleep outside, especially in the summertime. And he was sleeping outside on August 24th, 1953, when a being came over to him and woke him up.
So I asked him what he wanted because we have a lot of people who come in stuck in the sand and broken axles and whatnot.
Can I help you with something? I am Solganda, and I would be pleased to show you our craft.
He got up, he saw the being, it was Soganda, and he followed Soganda to the landing strip where there was a vehicle that was there. It was actually 19 feet tall and 35 foot wide. As George Van Tassel described it, it was a bell-shaped vehicle.
I walked with him to a spot underneath it, and an anti-gravity beam took me up through a hole in the bottom.
He got in, but when he came back, there was more information. He was literally coated with information for understanding more about life in outer space.
According to the Hertax, his understanding of this meeting with Soganda and the other space brothers increased over time.
He had to receive the download and then the understanding that came later. During that early part of his experience, he was in what we would call missing time. He was not aware of his time or place. He was not aware of the fullness of the drama.
How did George describe the beings that he encountered?
His descriptions were basically they were much like us, more beautiful, having greater resilience and strength, and having, as it were, the remarkable ability to look young, but they were very old, 300 to 400 years at a minimum.
Van Tassel would tell his followers that he encountered a man from Venus who transmitted important telepathic messages to him. I know there are no men from Venus, but that was the extraterrestrial story.
This alien was called Soganda, and gave Van Tassel the blueprint for a device. And this extraordinary device, which he worked on for years and years, was called the Integratron. And stories about it vary, but by all accounts, it was an immortality machine, a communications device, and perhaps even a time machine.
The specific formula for the construction of this device was F equals 1 over T, or frequency equals 1 over time. But what could this mean?
I'm not a mathematician at all, but I'm pretty sure that frequency and time are not concrete numbers in which you can plug into a formula that I know of, so I'm not sure.
This equation was given to him as a central part of explaining how the Integratron would function.
So this is a great breakthrough in geriatrics, in biology, and the whole concept of evolution.
That's a long time to be alive. 400 years. What do you do with all that time?
You travel to other planets.
So this device was somehow supposed to focus and channel the magnetic field of the Earth and turn it into this positive healing power.
George set out to construct the Integratron on property he acquired near Giant Rock, not long after leaving Solganda's spacecraft.
Is this where George had his experience?
Oh, actually, no. Where George had his experience was mostly off of that runway.
Okay.
On that airstrip that you see out there.
While he worked on the Integratron, George also transformed his piece of the desert into a mecca for members of a growing UFO community. Some of his pilgrims became convinced that Giant Rock sits on a vortex and could be a portal connected to other important sites by ley lines.
Many people believe that these portals or vortices are a doorway to another reality, perhaps a way through space-time, so a way to travel perhaps to other star systems without needing to construct a spaceship.
When they first came out here, he made a restaurant that his wife would make hamburgers and spiced apple pie.
Yeah, where is that now?
Well, that was one. It became.
I could use one of those.
The restaurant eventually became as big as you see this slab right here. And it even became so popular that Howard Hughes would fly in with his airplane just to get a piece of that pie.
Wow.
But this was part of the persona, and people, if you look up on the rocks, there's photos and documentations of people covering these rocks as they talked about their experiences with UFOs and their experiences that they would have with government conspiracy.
I certainly know that the people that landed here weren't of any danger to us.
Van Tassel would lecture here in front of thousands of devotees about how he had been called to serve them and mankind. But how? Well, he said he would do it by extending people's lives.
The Integratron would do that and more.
The Integratron was more than just a healing device. It was also a time machine. He believed time was connected with consciousness, and he felt with the right vibrational frequencies, your consciousness itself could be lifted, and that would change time itself.
This was the result of a formula which was given to me by a man who landed a ship at my airport in 1953.
To Van Tassel's followers, this all made sense. But to others, he sounded a bit unhinged.
Basic material.
All right, now how long is it going to take you to get your time machine in operation?
Well,
I mean, it all sounds so crazy, you must admit.
But George pushed ahead on his quixotic dream. raising funds from wealthy friends and lucrative quasi-religious schemes.
Did he create his own religion then?
Yes, in 1958, George Van Tassel solidified a church in the state of California called the Church of Universal Wisdom. Now also, in 1959, he got an unusual funding that was anonymous. It was about $40,000.
Wow.
And that's what he used to really finalize the construction of the Integratron. Now, people feel that that was from Howard Hughes, and it had to be anonymous.
As Van Tassel's flock grew larger, so did the interest of the feds.
George Van Tassel started a movement. He recruited people to join him, and he put on these immense conferences in the desert. Unsurprisingly, that put him on the radar of the federal authorities.
On May 17, 1954, with the Cold War in full swing, FBI agent John Malone receives a letter from the Los Angeles Times alerting the agency that some of the speakers at the Giant Rock spaceship conventions have communist affiliations. The letter also makes startling allegations about the Giant Rock airstrip. Specifically, that Japanese kamikaze pilots used it as a refueling station en route to a planned bombing of Hoover Dam.
There were a number of reasons why the FBI were interested in him. I think anyone who starts, effectively, almost a religion. You could view this as a space-age religion. Well, this sort of thing can upset the status quo, and it can be a destabling influence. And there were people in the FBI who thought, well, maybe this is a cover for something else. And of course, that something else was communism.
We know this because in 2019, the FBI released hundreds of documents from the dossier it kept on Van Tassel.
Was the purpose of all this to sort of undermine the fabric of American society, and to undermine the church, undermine people's belief in and respect for authority? So they were interested. They spied on him.
Rumors of nefarious activities at Giant Rock didn't scare off LA printer Bob Benson. He met George by chance in the early 70s, then moved to Landers to work with him.
What was the nature of that relationship?
Well, in 74, I met George because he needed someone to print and design the cover of his book, which is right here. And there's a cover, and this is the latest flyer I have on that. So anyway, after that, George and I got along so well that he asked me to join his group and help him do whatever.
The primary whatever was completing the Integratron. Despite all the distractions, George Van Tassel plugged away on his device. After 18 long years, he just about had it finished.
The structure and design of the Integratron, according to Van Tassel, are based on a few things: Moses' tabernacle, writings from Nikola Tesla, and telepathic instructions from extraterrestrials. This all-wood dome that stands 38 feet high and 55 feet in diameter would act as an electrostatic generator to rejuvenate human cells, with the hope of extending human life indefinitely.
So he built up the energy of this electrostatic generator, and then the idea was the electrons from the rods would be generated into the base of the Integratron. And people would walk through counterclockwise, and they would receive this negative ion bath, and it would literally rejuvenate their cells, and then they would walk out.
It's like a battery. It wears down through age, but if you charge it up and get it back into its younger state, then you're younger. And it shows up physically and emotionally and in every way.
But just as Moses never entered the Promised Land, George Van Tassel never got to flip the switch on his Integratron. In 1978, the man who claimed to hold the secrets to eternal life had his life cut short just weeks before the scheduled completion of his magnum opus.
After his death, it was rumored that the FBI actually went through and collected various documents, seized records. There are many people who believe that the FBI is part of a wider government UFO conspiracy.
How do you think George died?
From all reports, he died of a heart attack. He was taking medicine and seeing doctors for his heart, but I think he got to a point where it was time. Boom, who knows?
Did you see any evidence while working with George Van Tassel that there was any government interference?
I did see a little, but Van just played them as a joke. It's a joke, and they were there.
What were they after in those papers? Was there something about the Integratron? If it worked, self-evidently, the government, the military, the intelligence community would want that information. I mean, who wouldn't want to acquire a machine that could promise immortality or communication with other civilizations or time travel?
It's as the name implies, an integration of all knowledge and the fundamental basis of life itself through vibration. The blueprint is there, but the actual technology is of our generation. The fact that we're discussing him shows his ideas are alive and forth.
Today, the Integratron's unique architecture is said to create the ideal conditions for healing through vibrational sound baths. Bob Benson carries on Van Tassel's legacy with regular demonstrations of the Integratron's functionality at the Morongo Basin Historical Society in Landers.
And can we fire this puppy up? How does it work?
The next step is there's little brushes underneath this little ball, which is a inductor that inducts the electrons on the rods, and this is how it works and sounds.
The marvels of intergalactic technology. Immortality. Time travel. Life on other planets. George Van Tassel pushed all these buttons to capture America's fascination with the future. In the end, though, some say he didn't have the goods. But others say he left them all behind. We just need to learn from our space brothers and sisters how to use them. Then, immortality is ours. Join me next time when living forever is not in the stars, and those who make contact are lucky to just survive.